Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is Kenny. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. Folks, I got to speak to a leader today that is going to talk about a lot of different stuff, a lot of stuff that I had not really heard of before. So, inventor, entrepreneur, author, keynote speaker, and he is the discoverer of Hypernomics. Doug Howarth joined me and we got into a conversation about what Hypernomics is. What is 4D innovation? How do you imagine everything into reality? And why is any of this important to leaders today? Well, you don't want to miss a second as he talks about some stuff that is going to be so relevant to what you as a leader do every single day and how it can get even better. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. Doug Howarth has joined me today. Doug is an inventor, an entrepreneur, an author. He's a keynote speaker. He's the discoverer of Hypernomics. And we are going to find out all about that. I'm so excited to get all of that from him. But he is going to talk about why that is all important for you leaders out there. So, Doug, how are you? It is so great to have you on.
Kenny, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time to be able to be on your show. Thank you for having me. It's been great. So thank you.
Oh, it's my honor. It's my honor. So Doug, I really want to first find out a little bit more about your backstory. And I'm sure there's a lot of curiosity there. What's really led you to do all of the discoveries that you've done and to work on what you're working on now with this Hypernomics?
Yeah, hi, Ken. Well, Kenny, it's really kind of an odd story. When I was just a kid, I was thinking about what we were taught in high school about the coordinate systems that Rene Descartes came up with in the 1600s, and I always thought there was a little bit more to it than Descartes was letting on, but I didn't know what it was. So there's kind of a background problem percolating, and then one day, over 3 decades later, I'm out with my wife. We're buying a washing machine, and I'm observing what she does. I'm listening to what she says because I want to get it just right. You don't want to upset the wife. You don't. I don't. So I don't want to upset the wife. So she says, I like this washing machine. It's got a bigger drum than we've got at home. And I thought capacity, that's a dimension. Then price, capacity versus price. I thought, oh, she's working a problem in 2 dimensions. And then she said, we've only got 1 delicate cycle at home on the washer we've got. I want more delicate cycles. So I thought cycles and price. She just added a 3rd dimension. And so the cycles and the capacity both relate to price. So she's up in 3 dimensions already. And then she said, I saw the next model up the line. And I said, what about this one? Because it was the same thing, just a little bit bigger, a little bit nicer. Of course, it's more expensive. She says it's too much money. We can't afford it. And then I realized in that instant that we were part of this overall demand curve we're part of the quantity thing that's building these total sales up. So she's working part of the quantity versus price thing. So she had quantity, capacity, cycles, and price. She was working a 4-dimensional problem. And then this idea just flashed in my head, and I've been working on it pretty much ever since. So
wow.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And so which washing machine did you wind up buying?
It's a Samsung sitting out there in the laundry room right now. So yeah, great. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So now let's go with that a little bit more. So that adds a little bit of a backstory, and it really sparks something in you. So
Hmm.
so talk to us a little bit more. What does all that mean, and what is hypernomics?
Well, hypernomics, the root of the word means hyper means existing in more than three dimensions. So since we start at four dimensions, it truly is hyper.
Hmm.
And then the nomics, it relates back to the root word nomy, Nomy, or there's the suffix. And so hypernomics is a study of phenomena existing in four or more dimensions.
Mm.
And so what it really means is that people, it turns out that everybody in every market self-organizes in a way in which we can, if we spend enough time, we can discover it, and then we can characterize it. Once we characterize it, we can use it to our own benefit. So that's what it's trying to do. And it's taking every purchase and it's marking where the purchases are. So as you buy a car, for example, if you bought a certain model of a car, like in the electric car market, the Mitsubishi IMEF started the modern electric car market in 2009. So when that first sale happened in 2009, that was the market start. So if you were to plot that, it would have been one sale, whatever the price was. And so as the year goes on, they make more sales, and you're plotting that one point. And so that's, the quantity versus the price. And then in these other dimensions, you might have the range of the car and the horsepower. And then as time goes by, more people enter the electric car market, of course,
Hmm.
and they form these similar points. And it turns out that these points start to self-aggregate. Basically, what happens is everybody talks to everybody else,
Hmm.
read stuff on the internet, they go out and do the research, and they only support prices and what we call features, things that go into a product within a certain range.
Hmm.
And so once they understand that, they if somebody tries to price this washing machine, say, I forgot what it costs, but say it costs 800. Somebody wanted to price it at 1400, they might get a few takers, but not as many as they would if they priced it according to its features.
Mm.
What also could happen is if you priced it down to $200 and it was worth 800, you make a lot of sales, but you wouldn't have the sufficient margin. And so this is trying to figure out what that ideal price point is, and then trying to drive you to that.
Mm.
And at the same time, it looks at how demand forms. So before the show, ladies and gentlemen, Kenny and I were talking about restaurants.
Yes, yes, yes.
And you all have your favorite restaurant. Well, we've got our favorite one. It's just down the street here in our town. By the way, I'm just north of Los Angeles. So
Yes.
you remember when COVID hit? Everybody remembers when COVID hit.
Oh
And,
gosh. Yes.
back then in early 2020 here in California, you could eat outside if you had the patio space. So our restaurant had a patio, but it was kind of small. And so we go down there to socialize and eat and everything. And we noticed this very long line going out the door. And all the tables were occupied. And I looked around and I told the restaurant manager, I said, would you like to make more money? The reason I'm asking is because I'd like to eat and I'd like to be part of the equation here. She goes, well, of course I'd like to make more money, Doug. Why wouldn't I? I
Right.
said, here's what you need to do. What she had 3 tables of 6 and 3 tables of 4, and then just 1 or 2 tables of 2. I said, have you noticed that most of the parties that come in here, because I have, are parties of 1 and 2? And she thought about it and goes, yeah. Well, you need to accommodate those people and take out some of the bigger tables, because you're going to have more parties of 2
Hmm.
than you're going to have of 4 and 6. And it turns out, if you do the research, and I did after I told her this, that there's more than twice as many parties of 2 going to restaurants in the United States as there are parties of 4.
Wow.
And so she rearranged the furniture. She took out some of the big tables, put in some small ones, put in some 2-seaters, and her revenue shot up 25% in 2 months. And as you know, during COVID, it was hard to get revenue for a lot of businesses. So this turned out to be very key to
Hmm.
keeping this business afloat. And so that's just one way that this can help, is it's being observant of how demand works on the one side and the value of something works on the other. And so the entire, what we would call theory of hypernomics, only has four sentences to it, 13 words, which is features, determine value. Value drives price. Price limits quantity sold. Quantity sold is a feature.
Wow.
And that's all there is to it.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's what happens everywhere at all times.
Yeah. Oh man, that makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
The way you broke it down there.
Yeah.
And going back to the restaurant, that
Yes.
I would also imagine that her wait times were reduced, probably
Oh,
drastically.
yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you spoke about this a little earlier, word of mouth then starts to get out.
Right.
You go there, the food is good. It's not as long a wait as it was before. In fact, it's very small. And when you think about just a common thing about going to dinner, Doug, it's hard to get 4 people together.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's, it's easy
Not an easy
for
thing. No.
for me to tell my wife, hey, you and I, well, let's go out tonight. Of course, yeah. But hey, let's call Doug and his wife. I don't know. I'm okay, but she's not.
Right.
I love this. Now, I want to go a little bit further because you've done just some great research on this. What other businesses have you seen this really makes such a difference? I love the real world example of the restaurant. Give us a few more that you've worked with that are really grasping a hold of this, and then I'm going to ask you to go down the road of what this now will mean to even more leaders.
Okay, well, we'll take it from the I guess we could do it this way. Haven't tried this way before. We could take it from the high altitude examples
Yes,
to the low altitude examples.
that'd
So
be
it
great.
turns out that if you take these kind of techniques, it applies to spaceships, for example.
Wow. Okay.
So we've worked for NASA, we've worked for Virgin Galactic and Lockheed Martin Space. It works for spaceships, works for airplanes, it works for trains, it works for package delivery, it works for any service, manufactured product, or agricultural product. It actually works for ground beef, for example. And when we take it from the high altitude to the low altitude, the lowest altitude example I can give you, and this came to me out of the blue. Now, some of you people know, maybe you've heard of Dr. Richard Feynman, who was the Nobel Prize winning physicist.
Yes.
He famously studied ants. And so I found myself at the end of a trailhead, after I did my thing, and I'm sitting there, I'm resting, and I said, oh, there's an ant down there. I said, I've never looked at an ant for more than a second.
Me neither. Yes.
I said, never more than a second. So I said, what would that ant be doing? So I just looked at the ant, and I know he's here, and he's kind of doing this little wiggly thing. And then he's doing his wiggly thing here and wiggly thing here. And he goes around and he draws he's going in a counterclockwise motion. And your people can look this up too. Counterclockwise motion. And it looks like he's drawing a circle, except he's a little bit wider from where he started in when he makes the complete 360. Go, wow, that's interesting. And then he does it again. And he's wider still. I go, what's he up to? And then he does it again, and he's still wider. I said, what is this guy up to? And I go, all of a sudden it flashed on me. This guy's doing reconnaissance. The ant is doing reconnaissance. So I raced home, going into the internet, and I type in ant reconnaissance, and I hit the enter button. And wouldn't you know it, some researchers have found that ants, this particular species of ants, which goes in a counterclockwise motion, has been on the planet for 40 million years, and they do reconnaissance. What they try to do is what you ought to do in a market. Like if you're trying to put up a new business, say you got a franchise. Unless you're in Seattle, you don't want to put your Starbucks up across from another Starbucks.
Right.
You want to have some space so that you get people to come. You want population, but you want your Starbucks to be away from other Starbucks. So the ants do much the same thing. This guy was doing the recon. If he's trying to figure out where the colony ought to go, he says to himself, I don't want to be right next to the other colony, because then we have to compete for all the resources. He's trying to get himself away from the other colonies that are nearby. Mm-hmm. And then he's also saying, so that's the spacing thing. And then he says, much like the value analysis thing, he says, they found out, because they actually did experiments. They tested these ants, and they said, what would they do if they gave them this, they gave them that, gave them this? And it turns out they like dry places with a certain ceiling height. They don't want it to be too high. They want it to be too low, and they don't want it to be too damp, and they want to have, but they want to have access to water. And so these ants are juggling all these variables at the same time. And they're ants. They've got, 50 neurons in them, and they've been around for 40 million years.
Yeah.
So if the ants are doing this, certainly the people have been doing this since one person exchanged berries for meat. This is what happens in a market. These are how markets form, as people make these decisions collectively, and then they have to abide by these rules. And that's what I thought was fascinating. So
it really
works
is.
all the way from the anthill all the way up to space.
All the way up to space. Wow.
Yeah.
I love that example. That is, now I'm gonna have to look at the ants a little bit more.
Yeah, look up ant reconnaissance and hit enter, and you're going to see they do this counterclockwise thing, and then they've got these tests that they gave them.
Yeah.
I can imagine little ants doing their doing a little studying for their test. Oh, hey, we passed. Yeah, we did what they expected us to do. Yay, ants!
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yeah, right.
But it's so true. So
yeah.
How can, and so you've got just this different mind. The way it works is just it's spectacular in my opinion. How can leaders, where to start, Doug? Because one thing I grabbed from your website, I love that you say imagination, have your imagination turn into reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so leaders, especially a leader that's newly promoted, may take over a store or something like that. They can imagine that store being successful, but where do they start? And some of the stuff you talk about is just so great for them to start and really imagine. What are some key ways that leaders can turn what they imagine into reality?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can tell you. First of all, Kenny, I managed to come across all this stuff, and that's been great. But I don't distinguish myself from anybody else, in that I'm just one other person in the market. So, interestingly, all of us individually don't have a big impact on the market, but collectively we form these markets.
Yeah.
And so your managers need to understand that what you're trying to work to is how the market's going to respond to what it is that they do. And so suppose your manager was running an appliance store, and suppose he's got the ability to change prices. Now, if you take a class or two on how the customers react to your products, which can be taught to you. I mean, we could teach it to you. Other people could teach it to you. But if you see how they react to the products, then you can figure out if your product's overpriced or underpriced or correctly priced. Now, if it's overpriced, of course, if you drop it, you'll probably get some more sales, and your margin will probably decrease. But what you want to do is see if the added sales make up for the decreased margin. If you're underpriced, maybe you just raise the price up. Now your sales will back off a bit. Now your margin's better, and you could probably make more money that way.
Mm-hmm.
So what this does is it lets you go into your restaurant, your office. Say you sell office supplies. It lets you see if you're selling stuff at the correct price for your clientele, over and over and over again, so that you can optimize what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, and then there's this demand limit that happens to some places, which is that there's only so many things that your customers will buy. You could drop the price, and at a certain point, there's what we call an upper demand frontier, where you've got quantity limits the price, and then you've got an outer demand frontier, which is where the people say, I'm saturated, I can't buy anymore.
Mm.
In fact, the stock market forms this upper frontier, the S&P 500, and an outer frontier every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's also important to know that at a certain point, lowering your price is going to butt up against this limit that the buyers are going to form. And that's one of the things that you want to figure out, is you want to see if you can test for that limit and see where it is, so that you don't try to run afoul of it. Because if you run afoul of it, you could go under. So a good example of that is that in business aviation, there was an outfit up in Reno, north of here,
Mm-hmm.
that was building a supersonic business jet called the Ariane AS2. That Ariane was the company, the AS2 was their business jet. And it was founded by one of the Bass brothers out of Fort Worth, Robert Bass. And he's a billionaire. oil money.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going to build this business jet. Were really pretty, and they allocated $4 billion for its development. And we did a little research, and they go, that's pretty close. It could be a little bit more than that, but that's probably reasonable. We did a little more analysis, and they said, well, we want to charge $120 million for this thing. Now, to put it in perspective, one of the top business jets in the world is the Boeing BBJ-2, which is a converted airliner. That goes for about 80 million. But this is going faster, and it turns out it was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Worth 120 million. Mm-hmm. And then they said, we want to sell 300 in 10 years, 500 overall.
Wow. Wow.
And now that's where this demand frontier comes in. So you look at the demand frontier and you say, right now at this price point you've picked, when they started in 2014, the market would support 47. And then the market started to move in their favor, which is to have more, got to the point where it could support 63 in 10 years, but not anywhere close to 300. And so the market is moving slowly over this 5-year period. Mm-hmm. So I wrote an article on LinkedIn, and I said, this thing is worth every penny, but there's not enough pennies in the world for people to buy it. And I got this angry response. Turned out from a guy I knew that had used to work with a company I worked with.
Yes.
And he said, "Oh, you're all wet. We just got this big order in." And what he didn't tell me was that, he didn't tell anybody that was reading it, was that the order was all for what they call options, which in aerospace is kind of code for, if it works, I'll buy it, but I'm not committing to it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I said, well, good for you. You're still not going to make it. Even 93 would put them way below where they needed to be. Yeah. And then 6 months later, they went bankrupt, and they stopped writing me. So, but I mean, all this, they by my estimate, they sunk at least $1 billion into this, and this could have been prevented early on. So back to your question, Kenny, about how businesses can use this. Well, Clayton Christensen, a professor of economics, once wrote that 95% of all new business ideas fail. Well, what if we in the world could knock that from 95% to 94%? Now, it doesn't sound like much, but the other way to look at it is going from 5% success rate to a 6% success rate. What if the chances of our success just improved by 20%? Well, I would argue that if you did this routinely, you would have fewer failures. Now, there's a variety of ways you can fail. None of this is a guarantee. Things happen. You get black swan events like COVID in the middle of something like this, or another kind of catastrophe. But the idea is that you're trying to play to the population that's buying your product, and what they're doing is they're revealing what they want by their actions, and it's just there for you to pick it out and use it. That's what we're trying to get to.
Wow. Yeah, you broke it down so beautifully for me, and it makes sense for leaders. Here's going to be one of my last questions, Doug.
Sure.
So now I'm a leader, and I've figured this out, and I would imagine I'm piecing together that I've also got to be really close to my customers, but usually it's the staff that'll know a little bit more
right.
about their customers. So what sort of, how much should I share? I'm a leader with my front line and on this. How do I get them a little bit more aware of everything you just talked about? Because I think it's so many light bulbs going off of me. If I'm aware of this as a small business owner, or it seems like it doesn't matter what the business is almost, although I was thinking that it didn't matter. I'm from wireless. It didn't matter when iPhones were just at their peak. It didn't matter how much they cost. People still came to buy them. They figured it out. I think there's going to be some of those exceptions, but for the most part, I love exactly what you're saying. But as a leader now, what do I share a lot of this with my staff? Do I now try to educate myself as much as well as the staff?
I would say you do want to share it with the staff. In fact, you probably want your staff to be doing the frontline point work, especially your analytics people.
Yeah.
In fact, the issue we've had for our company is trying to sell it. You have to usually sell it to a president, and it's the workers, the people that actually do the analytics that get this, because they've been trained in analytics, and they seem to gravitate to it pretty quickly. So as you're a leader, you want the people that are going to be excited about this to use it, because they'll adapt what they've been doing to the product, and then drive answers, into the databases they create, push it through the software, and come out with answers on the back end. And that's what you want them to be able to do for you, is to give them, you want to enable them to be leaders in their field. And the other way to look at this too is people that are, you just pick a field. I mean, hypernomics is in its infancy. Imagine if you're doing this for, let's pick something like an emerging field now, like flip phones on the cell phones. What is the ideal size for the flip phone? What does it have to do? How big should it be? What should be the cost? Somebody will be doing the cost for you. What should be the value of it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this could tell you how to drive those answers out by using the analytics that all the customers are actually pushing out and giving you at the So
yeah, it's all out there from customers, which I think, and we don't typically in business look at it that way. We think that we're the experts and we can figure it out, but it's all out there with our customers. Doug, this is fascinating stuff. Yeah,
especially if you take your register, your stuff that you get from your sales informs you what to do.
Exactly. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Right.
See, now that's got to stick, leaders. If you just heard that, that's got to stick. Doug, this has been fascinating.
Thanks I'm glad you liked it, Kenny. Thank
so
you.
enlightening, man.
Really enjoyed my time with you here.
Yeah, I've so enjoyed it as well. So, but I want to really leave some time. How can people gather more information from you? And more importantly, how can people get to work with you?
Okay, well, my email is Dhowarth, that's DHOWARTH at hypernomics.com. So I'll spell it for you. HYPERNOMICS, hypernomics.com. The first 10 people that write me and want to have a consult, I'll give a free 1-hour consult to people. And then you can go off to our website. The company website is hypernomics.com, HYPERNOMICS, hypernomics.com. And then for the personal stuff, you can go to my personal website, which is doughowarth.com, and check that out. And on that one, I have links to my upcoming book with Wiley, which is coming out in January. So if you were to go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Wiley itself and type in Doug Howarth, my book will come up, which is available for pre-order now. And
okay.
Wiley's posturing it as a textbook, so we're hoping that we can actually push this into university and it becomes a class, and then eventually a concentration in a business school or something.
It should be. Oh, no doubt. It should be. Oh, that is awesome. Do you know what the name of the book is going to be? Did I miss it?
Yeah. It's called Hypernomics, Using Hidden Dimensions to Solve Unseen Problems.
Okay. Awesome.
And it turns out that this is a pretty ubiquitous phenomenon that you can employ, and we've discovered it works for any field that we've attempted to use it upon. As long as you got enough data. You have to have data.
Yeah, you have to have the data. Absolutely.
Right.
So leaders out there that want to innovate, that want to start to move their career forward, that want to bring something different to the table, this should be a must-have for you, and a must-listen for you. And go into Doug's website and email him, and just listen to him for he promised an hour. That's unbelievable. So Doug, thank you. Boy,
Kenny.
Keep doing what you're doing. It is really, I think it's going to help change the scope. I know you were very modest earlier. You said, hey, I'm not the only expert out there or whatever. But boy, oh boy, what you're doing is really very, very innovative and very unique, I think. I could say that. You don't have to. So
appreciate it, Kenny. Thank you.
Oh, no question. So let's leave it there, folks. So This has been the Leading from the Middle podcast with Kenny and with Doug. We'll talk to you real soon.